Hello Varlets. Thank you all for the Happy New Year's wishes in the last video. This video was supposed to come out a lot earlier, but between getting started with Reworked stuff and my PC suffering from unknown freezes and crashes, which needed to be taken in for repair, we're almost 2 weeks in since my last upload. An eternity in YouTube time. Now, seeing as we are still in the new year, still fresh, full of hope, and while waiting for Fat Shark to fully get back into the saddle, I thought I'd do a video on what I hope to see come in Darktide in 2024. Before I bring up my suggestions and hopes, I want to acknowledge that Darktide has come a long way from when it first launched. It's now a proper fleshed out game with amazing gameplay, art, and of course, music. But that's not to say there isn't room for improvement. So with that, let's start by taking a look at what still needs improving in Darktide. This, of course, inevitably brings us to the topic of crafting. Crafting is still not great in my opinion. I've talked about how Fat Shark is determined to maintain the RNG crafting system come hell or high water. So, with whatever I propose, anything that includes the total removal of RNG from the crafting system is simply an impossibility. Instead, any changes we do receive often comes in the form of RNG mitigation or frustration reduction. The latest implementation of this came when we were allowed to switch out any 2 blessings or perks from our weapons. This simple change greatly reduced the RNG when it came to crafting, as it allowed us more freedom to tweak our weapons. An improvement for sure, but there's definitely room to do better. Where I do continue to have frustrations is around obtaining weapons and upgrading them in the first place. This brings us to the topic of weapon quality and acquisition. Let's start with Brun's Armory. Why Brun can still provide us with minimum 300 rating weapons is beyond me. I feel that the minimum rating should be increased to 330 once you reach level 30. This gives you a much better chance of getting decently statted weapons without unnecessarily throwing dockets away. If getting decently statted weapons wasn't such a chore in the first place, Hadron ruining them with RNG wouldn't feel too bad. While on the topic of obtaining weapons, I also feel that every time we level up beyond level 30, we should also get a weapon. Vermintide 2 does this already. You get a commendation chest which gives you 3 different items every time you level up. Why this isn't in Darktide yet is also a question we might never find the answer to. Now, on to actually upgrading your weapons. First, yes, we need a way to change out Diamantine into Plasteel. Fat Shark already faced this problem back in Vermintide 2, where good players who only played on Legend or Cataclysm difficulties found themselves starved of low-level materials that were still necessary for weapon upgrading and modification. This needs to be in the game to not only reduce player frustration, but to also streamline a player's resource economy. I bet most of us are sitting on mountains of Diamantine with no way to spend it since you need to spend Plasteel as well. But on top of being able to convert Diamantine into Plasteel, the material rewards should be increased too. Crafting isn't cheap by any means, and to avoid players feeling they've been cheated out of materials they've already sunk into their equipment, we need to not only see an increase to the rate of material acquisition, but the avenues by which we can obtain more. For starters, the amount of materials we can pick up at base in a mission should be increased. The table you see here is what I previously proposed in my last State of the Game video. I describe how having a 50% multiplier allows us to accumulate the necessary quantities of Plasteel from each level of difficulty at a more streamlined, reasonable rate, especially when it comes to upgrading blue rarity weapons at least. A 50% multiplier is preferred to account for some variance in the generation of materials. Sometimes missions just don't spawn as much materials as you'd hope. This makes each mission more rewarding for the amount of time spent, increasing a player's material acquisition efficiency, which allows them to engage in crafting more often. RNG wouldn't feel as bad if you weren't also locked out of it because gathering materials in of itself was a slog. Another suggestion that is frequently brought up is to allow us to break our weapons down for materials. However, seeing as the weapons we obtain are often salvaged from combat zones as shown in the armory cutscene, I imagine breaking down weapons brought back from the field for materials to be disagreeable, to Hadron especially. Something Omnisaya will be pissed off at you and all that stuff. Instead, a more engaging way to procure more materials would be through custom contracts from Hadron. What kind of contracts might Hadron give you? Well, I'm glad you asked. Allow me to introduce to you something I call weapon calibration contracts. For some dockets, you can purchase weapon calibration contracts from Hadron, where she tasks you with using certain weapons in combat in order to gain performance telemetry for her research and other tech priest stuff. There will be a total of 6 contracts available weekly, 2 major contracts and 4 minor contracts. With the 2 major contracts, there will always be 1 melee weapon specific and 1 range weapon specific contract. The other 4 contracts are random weapons drawn from the pool of both melee and range weapons available. While minor contracts are simple with only a single task to complete for a decent reward and a small amount of performance telemetry, major contracts have more performance data for you to collect and require you to use the assigned weapon across more missions to gather more performance telemetry. Accepting the contract gives you a randomly rolled blue weapon that matches the contract you've chosen. You don't have to use the weapon the contract gives you, but it gives you the weapon so you can at least make progress with the contract without having to spend more ducats. You can, at any time, turn in a major contract even if you haven't completed it entirely. As long as you've completed at least one performance task, you can submit the contract to Hadron. Doing so will mean forfeiting the progress you've made in other areas of performance, along with the rewards and potential performance telemetry you could have collected. These contracts will differ for everyone, and contracts currently in progress but haven't been completed or turned in will remain active even after reset. This allows you to pick up from where you left off with a weapon, but it also means you need to wait for the next refresh cycle to get a new one. Having this system in place also opens up an avenue to solve another long-time frustration of many players: the inability to get the blessings they want. By collecting a sufficient amount of performance telemetry, you can have Hadron reveal the secrets of a specific weapon, uncovering from it a blessing you have not yet unlocked. Apart from upgrading a bunch of weapons in the hopes of rolling the blessing, this method gives you a way to make definite progress over time. If you are struggling to get Power Cycler on your Power Sword, for example, having it be the last blessing you have yet to reveal means you can use this method to secure the blessing. This, of course, is the last and worst case scenario. You'd still have to put in work and resources to get to that point, but I think this is a fair trade for being able to guarantee a blessing, eventually. If you have unlocked every single blessing in the game, performance telemetry can be traded in for various materials instead, maybe even allowing you to purchase some unique weapons from Hadron as well. Speaking of weapons, the one thing I'd love to see come this year are red weapons. For those of you who are unfamiliar, in Vermintide 2, we could obtain red weapons which could always roll with the max level equivalent of the perks we have in Darktide. This allowed you to min-max your weapons to the fullest, and they served as the final level of equipment grinding, providing you with a very strong reason to grind the hardest level content, as they would have the highest chances of dropping there. Unlike in Vermintide 2, however, in Darktide, our weapons have stat bars, which are capped out at 80%. I would imagine that a red weapon in Darktide would offer a general stat increase to the weapon, maybe capping out all its stats at 80% or even providing bonuses that exceeded the current 80% cap in some way. Another possible unique characteristic of red weapons is that they could have an additional modification unlock. Unlike our regular weapons, which can only have up to 2 modification choices, red weapons could instead have 3 or even 4 modification choices instead, allowing for total flexibility and optimization. As for red curios, they would grant us the ability to modify all 3 of its perks, allowing us to fine-tune a curio to fit a particular build more precisely. On the other hand, we could have a different set of red weapons called heroic weapons. These are red weapons that belonged to a named character, in the same way some of our cosmetics are also named character cosmetics. These heroic weapons will differ from the regular red weapons in that they can roll with blessings not normally found on the weapon, like the Surge Staff actually having the Surge blessing. In addition, certain heroic weapons could also roll with unique blessings only found on that specific heroic weapon, sort of like the exotic weapons from Destiny 2. This allows for some adventurous creativity when it comes to assembling unique and interesting weapons, but can also serve as a very strong incentive for the aspirational endgame grind. The trade-off with these heroic weapons are that the blessings and perks they come with are predetermined and can't be extracted or changed. How would red weapons be obtained? Well, I think having them be random drops from completing a mission is a given. Of course, they would have to be absurdly rare, and even grinding at the highest of difficulties would make it tough to farm for as well. You could also purchase a predetermined collection of red or heroic weapons from Hadron for a hefty amount of performance telemetry after you've unlocked every single blessing in the game. Collecting all the blessings in the game unlocks Hadron's Blessed Armamentarium, which holds a collection of weapons that are the same for every player for every class. This gives players another long-term goal to grind towards, and gives purpose to the performance telemetry they've accumulated after collecting all the blessings they need. We'll talk more about the methods of obtaining red weapons later in the video. While on the topic of weapons, let's talk about receiving new weapons. The last time we got any proper new weapons, not weapon variants, was almost a year ago, when Fatchunk released the Zealot's Indignatus Crusher and the Ogrin's Power Maul. We have not got anything entirely new since then. I'm sure there are many weapons we all want to see brought into the game: hotshot las guns, long las rifles, melter guns, power fists, bolt pistols, etc, etc. In all honesty, I feel like the next set of new weapons are going to come as part of a DLC purchase, like how it was done with Vermintide 2. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if an Armory Enhancement DLC dropped, in which it contained a bunch of new weapons for all classes to support the war effort in retaking Atoma. As for what specifically I would like to see for each class, I think I speak for all my Psyker siblings when I say I need a new staff to play around with. I would very much love it if we got a staff that was focused on single target DPS, so Psykers would have something for damaging bosses and monsters effectively. For veterans, I really want to see some heavy armaments. Melter guns, hotshot las guns, and grenade launchers are some of the things I'd love. For Zealots, I just want a sword and shield combo to really lean into the Crusader or Paladin roleplaying. Hell, I'd appreciate dual weapons as well, letting us use in one hand a tactical axe and in another a combat blade, maybe even a las pistol. That would be cool. For Ogrins, all I want are two-handed heavy weapons. Just give me what the Crushers are using and I'll be happy. I want to bring more smashing into my games as the big man, creating a crater in the ground where the unfortunate heretic once stood. I hope we'll get new toys to play with soon. I really want to mix up my buildcrafting more. When patch 13 introduced the talent trees alongside a bunch of other changes to enemies and blessings, I was kind of expecting new penances to make an appearance. For us long-time players, apart from some of the really long-time penances, we've basically done everything and don't have anything else to chase for. I'd love to see more penances enter the game, and with it, more penance-bound cosmetics that are actually interesting and cool. Maybe, alongside the contract suggestions I came up with earlier, we can have penances tied to that. Imagine a Hadron or Mechanicus themed cosmetic, or even a portrait frame. Moving on, let's talk about Assassination missions. The introduction of the Author's Offensive showed us what a real boss fight could be. Battling the twins on hard mode for the first time was a real test of strategy, skill, and loadout, and it was honestly some of the most fun I've had in Darktide. With that, I'm hoping that Assassination missions are given a second look or improved. Unlike the bosses you fight in Vermintide 2, where they have interesting mechanics or different fight encounters, the Assassination targets in Darktide are real pushovers. I'd even go so far as to say that getting to the boss is actually tougher than fighting the boss themselves. While having more of what the twins battle was would be nice, I think there's an opportunity to make Assassination missions more formidable and require some actual planning instead of smacking them around like a toy. My suggestion would be to introduce almost raid-like mechanics to Assassination missions. If you've played Destiny 2, you'll know that every boss encounter always has some sort of mechanic to overcome before you can continue to damage them or to prevent you and your team from being wiped out. We could combine the finale elements from various missions and weave them in as part of the Assassination encounter. For example, after breaking the boss's void shield and taking them down to 50% health, they retreat back into a fortified position, invulnerable to further attacks. Various ads start to spawn into the arena while a new objective appears. Depending on the map and mission, you might need to hack into a nearby console to unlock a door in the arena, giving you access to a lever which forces the boss back into the arena to fight you. You might even need to destroy a power generator or something, overloading the console behind the boss, causing it to explode and sending them tumbling back down into the arena to fight you. While more technically ambitious, Fat Shark could take a page out of Remnant 2 and have the boss arena be an evolving one where different angles of cover emerge and retract throughout the battle. This also opens up the idea of having different boss types as well. There are numerous possibilities to use existing encounters to make Assassination missions more interesting than they currently are. Of course, having a mission where it's all about beating the boss into a pulp can be fun too, but if it's the only thing we're doing, then I think there's room to expand on how these rather unique encounters are faced. Next, let's talk about combat encounters. While I love how huge elite patrols can get on Damnation level, being rushed by a dozen or so Crushers can get pretty repetitive. What's more, increasing the difficulty by bumping up damage and health is probably not very sustainable. Not to mention, it's a very lazy way of making things more challenging. Instead, I propose we add more enemy encounter combinations into the game. While the typical elite patrol is made up of armored units like Crushers, Maulers, and Ragers, and we have gunner patrols with gunners, shotgunners, and shooters, I would like to see one that makes use of the assassination target as a super elite or commander. This commander enemy is basically a weaker version of the assassination target, but patrols certain areas alongside heavily armed reinforcements. Commander patrols can also act as very big roadblocks for speedrunners and rushers. Unless they are so skilled as to take down the entire patrol on their own without help and without slowing down, their presence forces them to wait for their allies to catch up or to wait for the entire commander patrol to move away. Next up, I want to talk about new game modes. Probably one of the most requested modes for any horde shooter is having an endless defense mode. I imagine we could be deployed as the vanguard force to hold down a strategic location for as long as we can, buying time for the Morningstar to deploy more reinforcements or to secure more ground in another unseen area to engage in espionage. The longer we fight, the more intense the enemy spawns will be, increasing in number and ramping up the frequency of special spawns. Of course, if and when we are finally overwhelmed, we will be rewarded for our brief heroics with materials and equipment based on the difficulty level and the number of rounds we last. Red weapons could also drop from here, with its drop chance increasing the longer you hold out for. This mode will come with its own penances and cosmetics, of course. Finally, one of the best things that could happen to Darktide in 2024 would be the introduction of a Chaos Waste mode into the game. For those who are unaware, the Chaos Waste was a free DLC for everyone in Vermintide 2. In the Chaos Waste, you and your team battled across 4 different maps back to back and against overwhelming forces not unlike that of Auric or Auric Maelstrom missions. In fact, imagine doing 4 Auric Maelstroms back to back, but with white weapons when you first start. Throughout each of the missions, you are able to collect coins, which you can spend to upgrade your weapon's rarity to unlock more of its potential, or even purchase an entirely different weapon in the middle of a mission. You may also spend those coins to purchase crazy skill upgrades like passive healing, unbreakable blocking, chain lightning, double range shots, and so much more. It was a totally different game compared to the regular game mode. The introduction of the Chaos Waste breathed new life into Vermintide 2, offering so much more replayability as each game, which normally lasted for an hour, could be totally different from the one before. Successfully completing a Cataclysm level Chaos Waste rewarded you greatly, with 3 Emperor level chests. This is basically the equivalent of getting 9 Transcendent level pieces of gear for an hour's worth of work, and was one of the best sources for farming red weapons. One of the best things about the Chaos Waste was that it leveled the playing field between long-time veterans and new players in terms of equipment. Other than picking the weapons you want to start with, the quality of your equipment doesn't matter in the Chaos Waste as they all begin as white weapons. Trinkets, or curios in Darktide's case, have no effect in the Chaos Waste either. This means you can enjoy some of the most intense combat experiences without having to grind for hours for endgame level gear, nor need to min-max your loadouts. It was a mode that combined the best of RNG with the best of your own skill. I'm sure a great many of us are waiting for Fat Shark to drop this spectacular mode on us eventually. With that, we've reached the end of the list. Those were the top 12 things I personally want to see come into Darktide this year. I know there are things that I didn't cover, like having a new enemy faction, new maps, or even a more sociable social space. While those would be nice to have, they don't necessarily increase my enjoyment of the game as much as what I have listed before. The year is fresh, and at the time that this video is released, Fat Shark should be very close to getting back into full swing. I eagerly await to see what the first piece of news will be to start another great year of Darktide. What about you? What are you hoping to see in Darktide this year? Let me know in the comments below. Before I sign off, as this is a new year, I'm getting real work stuff in order first before I can properly plan out what I like to do content-wise. So as a result, video output might be a little slower than normal, but things should pick back up once the first quarter progresses enough and things have more or less settled. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Varlets.